His legacy for me is clear. I think he leaves behind a legacy of lies. I think he leaves behind a legacy of deception. I think he leaves behind a horrible legacy that continues today when it comes to his handling of the pandemic. You know, I was thinking back today on my drive in about some of the more memorable moments of our outgoing governor. I will think of him as someone who insults people who dare to disagree with him. For instance, how he went across the globe to call people who were concerned that his climate policy was putting them in the poorhouse miscreants.
Brilliant voters of the state of Washington rejected these miscreants' efforts by a 62 to 38 margin.
I will remember how at a time in our state when he should have been working hard to bring people together during the COVID-19 pandemic, he was instead vilifying large swaths of Washington voters.
You are a bioreactor facility generating virus and spreading it around, including to kids who can't get vaccinated. I want to reiterate that. If you're a 50-year-old man who, voted for Donald Trump and didn't think COVID was a problem and you don't get vaccinated right now, you arrest every kid in your city.
I will remember that rather than bringing other people into the fold to try to get us through one of the most complex and confusing times we've ever faced as a state, that he ruled over us like a dictator for 975 days.
There's only one person in the state of Washington who has the capability to save those lives right now, and it happens to be the governor of the state of Washington.
And I'll certainly remember all of the issues that he made worse.
The fundamental underlying challenge is that we do not have enough housing in our state for our people.
Yeah, crime, homelessness, as you heard there, Governor Inslee saying that the fundamental underlying issue with our housing or homelessness crisis is housing, which we all know is not true. Homelessness, despite the billions of dollars that we've spent on it under Governor Jay Inslee, has gotten exponentially worse. Our mental health crisis has gotten exponentially worse. The state's largest psychiatric hospital lost its federal accreditation under this governor, which we know has only fed into the homelessness crisis, the crime crisis, the drug crisis has gotten exponentially worse. I mean, you name any critical issue facing the state of Washington, and it has gotten exponentially worse under this governor. Of course, you can't talk about his legacy without talking about his climate agenda and how many of the things the goals that he set forth to say, oh, I'm the climate governor, aren't even realistically feasible. Some of the things like the Climate Commitment Act that he pushed through are just a massive money grab. And I'll remember all the things that he did to keep that grift going. I'll remember the fact that he decided before the election, so voters wouldn't repeal the Climate Commitment Act, to bribe them with their own money.
Are you trying to bribe voters with this?
No, they're trying to take away $200 from these families. Who wants to take away $200 credit from a family to help them with their costs of these low-income folks? That's reprehensible. You know what else? It's weird.
Yeah, and I'll remember when there was pressure on him for saying, I'm going to bribe people with energy credits with their own money and act like I'm doing them a favor. He literally used children as human props to avoid difficult questions.
These kids, when they're 72 years of age, like I am, will have a Washington state where there's some trees that haven't burned down, where they can breathe because forest fire smoke has not ruined their lungs, where their mom and dad got little help financially with their utility bills, where they can get on a school bus that's electric and drive for free. What I would say to them is these kids deserve those things.
Yeah, not the first time or the last time he used individuals as human props. Remember when he was cleaning up the homeless encampment and people were questioning why his right-of-way initiative was costing taxpayers like $1 million per homeless person to get them out of homelessness? And he gathered around the low-income people who were helping to clean up trash. And he said, well, I believe we need to pay these people. Don't you? Don't you think we have to pay these people? Basically trying to justify spending $1 million per person to get them out of homelessness in his failed initiative. I think there are two clips for Governor Inslee that always play back in my mind. One of them is more recent than the other, but it just shows how brazen, I think, and how bold he was willing to be in his deception when it came to pushing policies that would suit his agenda. I mean, I have to keep going back to the Climate Commitment Act and the fact that the first time they passed, or that they looked to pass, a carbon tax way back in 2014, Governor Inslee's own staff said, yeah, this is going to increase gas prices, so we should be prepared for that. You fast forward, they try to push it through the second time, and Governor Inslee lied repeatedly for multiple years in order to get the CCA passed about the impact it would have on gas prices.
At what point are you going to tell the people of Washington State that they're going to possibly see much higher gas prices next year because of the CO2 emissions tax?
Well, that's not true. They're not going to see much higher gas prices, and maybe even lower than they are today. This is going to have minimal impact, if any. Pennies. We're talking about pennies, potentially.
Yeah, pennies. And he still has not today, as he leaves office, still has not today acknowledged that he spent 2 years, and there would be nothing, he would lose nothing by it. The CCA survived an initiative. The CCA is here to stay, most likely. There would be no consequence for him coming out besides his personal being labeled a liar, which we're already labeling him. No consequence in terms of the bill being impacted or the policy being impacted for him to come out and say, you know what, it has increased gas prices. Yeah, in hindsight, even though he knew it all along. So he lies willingly, and not only to push his policy agenda, but to avoid accountability for the last 12 years. The most memorable moment, not just because I was involved in it, because I think I was so stunned by the clear deception and how shameless he was when he lied. We're in the middle of CHOP, 6 blocks of the state's largest city taken over, and he acts as if he knows nothing about it.
Governor, I'd like to ask you about what's going on in Seattle. There's this thing called the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. What's your thought on that? The fact that the protesters have taken that over and not allowing people to come and go freely?
Well, that's news to me, so I'll have to reserve any comment about it. I have not heard anything about that.
What should voters make of the fact that you were apparently oblivious to police abandoning an entire precinct in the state's largest city? You have 1 minute, 15 seconds.
Yeah, well, listen, if you look at the facts of that situation, I could not have been oblivious to it because I actually deployed the Washington State National Guard.
Sir, then why do you say you did not know about it?
You'll have to go back and look at some quote. I can't comment on the quote right now.
This is news to me. You went on to say, I haven't heard about it from any credible source. Nearly 2 days after CHOP happened, you're now saying you did know about CHOP.
Listen, I can't tell. I knew about CHOP.
Yeah. So farewell to Governor Inslee. While he's drawing his doodles, he can draw a doodle of the door not hitting him in the ass on the way out. That's truly how I feel about it. This is someone who inflicted untold amount of damage on families in Washington State during the pandemic. Still has not apologized for what he put state employees through when it came to the vaccine mandate, many of whom's, their lives changed forever. They lost their livelihoods. They never got them back. Never admitted, never had any desire to go back and acknowledge that some of the things they did were wrong in the moment. No humility whatsoever. No introspection. You know, this is someone who, on his watch, Washington State had the lowest number of police officers per capita, said nothing about police defunding until a year or two after the fact, and then wanted to act like he was the best friend of law enforcement. Wasn't even invited. This is a governor that was rarely ever invited to the funerals of fallen officers, including the funerals of fallen Washington State Patrol troopers. That tells you all you need to know about Jay Inslee. Look, I'm sure when he's not dictating other people's lives, I'm sure he is a good husband and a good father and a good grandfather, and I wish him well. It kills me in the back of my mind that he is going to likely fall into a 7-figure job in the climate sector that is going to be paid in part by the policies he pushed on working class people in the state of Washington. So I have really not a lot of positive things. I wish I could be more undivided, so to speak, and share some good stories about our outgoing governor. But the truth is he was never qualified for the job. He might have been qualified on paper as a former congressman. He was never up to the task. That's the truth. sitting in front of him and doing an interview with him, even as a 20-something, was horrifying. I mean, the lack of knowledge on basic things, and I've said this over the years, this is not the first time I'm saying this. It was like talking to a wall. And he ruled our state for 12 years, and in large part because the media allowed him to. The Seattle Times came out with this big thing on Governor Inslee's, legacy and stuff. And they had said that he leaves behind sort of a mixed legacy because obviously all these issues have gotten much worse, including climate issues, by the way. He wants to act like he was the climate governor. Climate issues in our state, by his standards, have gotten much worse. But I looked at that Seattle Times article and I said, I don't want to hear anything the Seattle Times has to say. I don't want to read anything the Seattle Times has to say critical about Jay Inslee, because the Seattle Times would endorse him, even though they knew that he wasn't up to the task, that he was doing a bad job, that Washington State is in a far, far worse off place than we were 12 years ago when he took over from Christine Gregoire. Oh, and not even to mention the year that he spent gallivanting across the country 50% of his time running a presidential campaign where he got 1% in the polls. So this is someone who never should have been governor in the first place, but certainly never should have been governor for 3 terms. And the media has a lot of responsibility in not holding him accountable in a way where he was forced to contend with some of these issues more aggressively and more honestly. He got away with so many lies, so much deception, so much gaslighting, so much incompetence. And that's what politicians do, I guess. It's the media's job to hold them accountable, and the media absolutely fell flat. So farewell to Governor Jay Inslee. Maybe in a couple months from now, I'll be begging to have you back because Bob Ferguson will be that much worse. But I do know a few things about Bob Ferguson. I know he's incredibly intelligent. So in that sense, I think that that's an improvement. I don't mean to be mean, but I'm just being frank with you. He right now is acting like he wants to be a fiscal conservative. I don't trust him. But if he wants to do that for the first few months, hopefully he continues on that path. But the bottom line is we needed a change. I'm not sure it's going to be the best change for Washington State, but after 12 years of the same person, we should never allow one person to rule a state for 12 years. More than 7 million Washingtonians, you're telling me that is the only person who was qualified enough to be the governor for 12 years. That's insane.